Welcome to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Today we go over which decks are topping, which builds we see the most and why. We will then rank them up and call it a day. But first, check out these zero damage gaming playmats. We recently added Overlord, Tavas, Victor and have many more on the site right now. Use the code LAUNCH at checkout to get 10% off. Link for that will be in the description. Getting into the video, keep in mind that this video is about the meta before the Bermuda booster and after GBT 14. So let's go. The dust has settled, loads of tournaments have happened in Japan, and quite some tournaments have been going on in the English meta. By now we can assume what decks are the top meta decks purely based on data, and we can also see which lists are great and which lists are not. Also a shout out to my friend Joshua, which is one of the most esteemed judges in Asia. Since he sees what's doing well and why firsthand almost every single day, I asked him for some input for this video as well. At the top of our list, the very best meta decks, we have Nubatama and Gear Chronicle. Looking at tops from all over Asia, as well as quite a few in English, we notice these two decks popping up again and again and again. Funnily enough, in team leagues, virtually every single topping team has either a Nubatama player or a Gear player, or usually even both. Nubatama lists generally haven't really evolved at all. This deck is pretty cookie cutter and just works. They eat through gigantic 10 card hands as if it's nothing and can often win on first stride. If they don't beat you on first, they will usually win on second stride. Gear Chronicle lists have had slightly more variation. As I've mentioned before, we had a small period where Time Leap ZTB decks started popping up and topping quite some VGCSs. If you're interested in that variant, I made a deck tech for it on the channel. However, by now, that variant has started dying off again. As I said in my video, it's a very explosive deck, but slightly less consistent than the pure ZTB variant. And so right now, the gear deck that keeps topping is your cookie cutter ZTB deck. I also made a deck profile for that if you're interested. Now, in second place on our list, we have the other super strong decks that don't quite reach ZTB and Nubatama levels of ridiculousness, but do come very close. We have Chaos, Nociel Gize and Sherrod. Now for Chaos, the main reason is that it's quite an annoying matchup for ZTB, even though they do have some Vanguard based options. And it's also annoying for Sherrod for that same reason. It's also a very painful matchup for both Altmile and Luard and has a solid chance against Victor. It can also counter Nociel Gize with from hand locking to prevent Gize from dealing damage. Overall, lists haven't really evolved and attendance for the deck did drop. However, it does manage to still top quite a bit regardless of its lower attendance rate. The fact that it deals well with some of the more popular decks is probably the reason for this. Then Nociel Gize. Oh boy, this is a fun one. When it initially started topping in Asia, I made a video on this deck already explaining why it's solid, so if you're interested in that you can go check that out. But this video of mine got quite some backlash. People ridiculed the deck and me saying it's good. Luckily, it's now topping so darn consistently in WGPs and VGCSs that all these naysayers can shut the fuck up. It also recently topped in ARG. My friend Kevin piloted it and he basically destroyed every single Nubatama deck inside. I believe he faced 5 or 6 Nubatama decks that day, so congrats man. One thing I really didn't see coming was that it would be able to deal with Nubatama so well. I first thought Nubatama could just outrush it on first stride, but looks like there's a way. Then we have Sherrod, an insanely powerful deck that basically soul charges every non-trigger and then just hits you with unguardable gigantic columns. Its only downside really is that its first stride, while immensely powerful with the deck thinning and hard plussing, doesn't push quite as hard as Nubatama's, and I also feel like it's slightly more complex to pilot. It is still an awesome strong deck though, and once they hit that second stride Balam with Baleful Repressor and or Gastis with a deck thin so hard they'll definitely hit that double stand, it's generally game over. Now finally we have this odd row, and I say odd because results seem to vary heavily depending on whether you check Asia or English results. I feel like this is because the English metagame just got GBT 14 and so we have like a few more weeks to really mature into it, I guess, because our results do look a lot like the ones Japan had when the set just dropped. On this row we have Victor, Luard and Altmile. Victor is still just a really strong deck that can win on first stride, and if they don't they'll probably win on second. While it isn't quite as busted as Nubatama, it's still a really strong contender. With that being said though, In Asia, it's doing practically nothing right now, apart from the very rare top here and there. As for deck lists, it hasn't really changed. The Star Galaxy booster basically gave them great upgrades for almost every slot, and so the deck mostly built itself after some playtesting. Luard still gets a few tops here and there, not as many as around the release of the set, but can't really complain. Now for deck lists, this is another interesting one. The deck list and playstyle of the Luard variant that tops right now, the only one at that, is wildly different from the deck we know from GBT 12. GBT 12 Luard was basically Stride Aura Geyser Doomed, draw 200 cards of Belial Owl, do maybe a Raven Loop, and or win on Drag Strider. That was it. Right now, the only Luard variant that tops is based on using Ganon and Fuamnacht to hit ritual counts in the early game, whilst also putting some pressure with Ganon already, to then draw into your low grade 3 count Luard, Stride for free because you're at ritual 5 from the get-go, and then start doing multi-attacks with Darda and Slaptail on your first Stride, usually winning the game on your second Drag Abyss or Ultima. The way this deck runs is wildly different from what we're used to, but it does seem to be the only competitive variant of the deck. I also made a deck profile on this version, which is also on the channel. Then we have Altmile, or as I like to call it, Fides.deck. Whilst the Fides turns are pretty scary, it's also Altmile's primary problem. It doesn't really have that much going for it apart from that card. Brave still isn't the most ideal keyword, and apart from their busted Fides Stride, the deck just isn't as scary as, let's say, Nubatama. Lots of decks build gigantic hands now that can actually keep up with the crazy Fides skills and so forth. Whilst the deck is carried by Fides strength and seems to do well here and there, it's not as much of a powerhouse as Nubatama or some of the other decks higher on this list. It also crumbles against Chaos, however. Do keep in mind that it can steal quite some games, and I'd say the deck is still in the meta. Finally, I'd like to do a shout out to our Dark Horse deck, Spike Brother Dust BS, which basically relies on using Jelly Beans and Mecha Trainers to get heals to hand, to then rush to Dust, and using loads of multi-attacks to close out the game. It also has the scary Hellheart loop at its disposal depending on how the game turns out. This deck probably has some of the lowest attendance rates in the meta, yet it just keeps topping in big Asian tournaments. It topped in ACQ Indonesia and ACQ Singapore, though the Singapore one was slightly more reliant on Hellheart, they say. So even though you may not meet the deck a lot, it's still a deck to watch out for just in case. That was it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the Solemn Vanguard channel and click the bell button to stay up to date. As always, if you're in the market for a sweet playmat to go with your favorite deck, consider picking up a zero damage gaming playmat. You can use the code TAVASISBAY to get 10% off. Like the video if you liked the video, and let me know in the comments down below what deck you're playing in your upcoming tournaments. I will see you soon. Ciao.